Hate is a very strong word, and we only use it in cases that mean something passionately, and in this case one can argue that passion very well. It's been no secret recently I've been doing pieces on Pirates of the Caribbean and some of the characters, but I've never really honed down on the films themselves, and I really want to talk more on that. More specifically, after my Blackbeard video, I laid out my biggest gripes with how he ended up in that film, and how that broader problem happens to relate to the film he's a part of in Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. And this is a film I originally thought was better than it was reviewed at the time, and really enjoyed the different take after the original trilogy, moving on with characters from Elizabeth and Will. A point that many people often miss, but I preferred in moving on to a different set of characters. Yet now looking back on it once again, I've changed my tune, seeing that this film really wasn't as good as I thought it to be. This doesn't mean the characters are bad for the part of Jack and Barbossa or most of the acting, it's the entire story and setting that ends up being stupid. Where this note comes from the fact that this Pirates is not an original story the same way the previous 3 films were, where instead it was adapted from a novel known as On Stranger Tides that featured an original character that goes along this journey with voodoo, zombie, and the supernatural while on a quest for the fabled Fountain of Youth, encountering real historical figures like Blackbeard and even Ponce de Leon. This is where Disney and the writers Elliot and Rossio would find this novel to get the rights to and adapt it for a Pirates of the Caribbean film, and how it would retain most of the core points of the original novel, but now with more Jack and more in line with the franchise instead. And when you look at it overall, it's more of a loose interpretation with the book, with ideas that are adapted that mainly consist of Blackbeard and the Fountain of Youth, more than saying anything from the book itself. And to be fair, that is a good idea to go along this journey, it's just that the entire execution failed flat. So when you see me say that I hate Pirates 4, I don't really fully mean that it's a terrible film. It is bad, but it's more that I mean that this film failed to realize itself fully set on a proper journey for Jack that feels more like a side piece or a spin-off, yet still better than the next film after it in Dead Man Tell No Tales. Now when you look at the beginning of the film, it encompasses the opening statement here. It's about 21 years after the last film apparently, after Sparrow began his search for the fountain, where one man on the sea found one logbook of Ponce de Leon 200 years after his time arriving in Spain mostly dead, where King Ferdinand orders the search for it to begin immediately with the tide. At the same time in this film, we're introduced to Gibbs in London on trial for being mistaken as the one and only Jack Sparrow, whom Jack disguises brilliantly as a judge to save him from execution, where there is found to be talk of rumors in London of Jack procuring a crew, which even he didn't know himself. Enough that gets him into contact with one King George II himself, who also wants to find the Fountain of Youth before the Spanish does, for the obvious reasons of being a selfish monarch, as these films like to write. The reason he's here is of course where he has to guide them to get to the fountain under one Captain Barbossa, who suddenly appears as a privateer in a position in the Royal Navy after losing the Black Pearl when we last seen of him. And yeah, to start out, it's a very strong position where there's nothing really wrong about this entire introduction, nor the search for the events, where it begins the film strongly showcasing how Jack Sparrow is a clever man still disguised as an idiot, planning as he goes along to make his escape from the British and to the tavern, which to this film's credit, it does do a better job to settle disregard versus Dead Man Tell No Tales, where Jack is not acting like Jack in that film, since that only takes place actually 1 year after the events of Stranger Tides. So it makes their decisions more infuriating when he does stuff like this and then ends up like that, because at the very least, when you are watching a Pirates film and how it introduced itself, Jack is supposed to be someone who is both comical yet intelligent at the same time, and this film does well to settle that difference in for Jack when he's virtually pushed into a situation like this, one that ends with his father apparently at this tavern for his little chase about the rumors that apparently involve him for a search for a crew and the fountain. And this scene actually sets up more of the profane ritual to how the fountain is to be conducted, 2 chalices and how it will test you, an event that will obviously happen at the end of the film because that's the point of the search of the film. But Captain Teague is here for the obvious reason so Jack can find a crew that is searching for that ship that leads him to the fake Jack Sparrow, who happens to be his own former love interest, Angelica, who has been disguising as him to attract the crew and Jack himself to board none other than Blackbeard's ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, who is in also search of the fountain, while Barbossa gets the Gibbs to join in as the only other person who technically knows the location of the Fountain of Youth. So what this sets up is like a 3-way race, the British, the Spanish, and Blackbeard's crew, where you kind of get this image here, and it's not going to be as clean as you think in the previous films when they went on a more coherent path. It's more factional to how this film is going to solve its problems. Because, like we just said, this film is on that Stranger Tides novel that leads everyone to the same fountain destination. but this entire section is where the film starts to falter a bit when it goes down a cliff. The scene where Jack notes that he's on Blackbeard's ship, which should be a stunning surprise, is mixed with various elements that I've talked about before that makes it a more mediocre part of the journey, because Blackbeard should be shaped up to be something else, but he isn't with the time that is given. Because you showcase what it has: the Queen Anne's Revenge, regular pirates coerced into service with zombified men as his lieutenants, and then other sects like a missionary and a young boy who's involved in this adventure for some reason. All that which contribute to Jack thinking it's best to perform a mutiny then under the surface of Blackbeard after discovering that Angelica is Blackbeard's daughter, or how she thinks she says that and is being manipulated into such thinking that Jack notes. And yeah, they quickly show all of these aspects and then perform the mutiny, but how Blackbeard comes out to show his enchanted powers and makes quick example of the crew before telling Jack what he seeks because of a prophecy saying he'll die due to a one-legged man. Spoiler alert, obviously meaning Barbossa later in the film, where all of this is just doing coercing everyone to his will. Again, I've explained my issue with Blackbeard before, so I'll keep it minimum, where it feels more rushed here for a character of his stature, where you're not actually given enough time to see the legend of Blackbeard and his exploits as the pirate that all pirates fear, and more of just this leader who demands everyone to do what he says, while Hector is over here telling the legends and keeping everyone in check as they stay the course while arriving near Whitecap Bay. The problem is it's all being set up and not enough time to justify itself the same way that Barbossa was introduced in the original Pirates of the Caribbean, and now you're just dragged into here because Blackbeard is the legendary character and he should live up to that. But you won't get that because that's not what the film is focused on. It's focused on desperation and a class to find the Fountain of Youth. At the same time, this is where we actually find out where the Black Pearl is, hidden and shrunken into a bottle after what happened to Barbossa years ago, and now it puts into perspective of where Jack is heading to in this story, not caring about the fountain, but getting the Black Pearl. And then the next part of it is all about hunting for a mermaid's tear, making all these sailors go out to find one successfully, but how they are fierce monsters who drag them to the depths while Blackbeard stays shooting on land because of course he does. And they only manage to survive when Jack blows up the lighthouse, and then the missionary Philip accidentally captures a mermaid successfully. And you gotta point out stuff like this because this is the strongest aspects of why I hate this film, or why this film seems weak overall for critics. This eventual relationship with the mermaid known as Serena and Philip, which is basically non-existent outside the major plot of the film. An aspect of putting in mermaids and other creatures where they needed to create some drama, where it somehow came into the form of a man of God and a siren that takes lives. And I'll complain a bit more about this later, but the point remains is that where the main focus is on Jack and the others, there is this side of the adventure that has no bearing on the overall plot other than they need a mermaid to produce a tear. And like many people have said before, they put this in because they had no Will and Elizabeth dynamic or romance going on here, which as we know was basically the case for the past 3 films, and they are missing that dynamic, so they just really needed to fill in that gap, where apparently the old Jack and Angelica flame just wasn't enough for them. Like, you have to note here that you don't necessarily need romance at all, because of how this one just isn't that strong and is only about a MacGuffin to get it here. And the second part is that Pirates is never really mainly about love at all, and is more about the love of the sea. And there is also the other fact that she was just with the other mermaids before attacking the crew, so I really don't feel like this is a good choice in any capacity. Like, she was with her sisters who are all villains attacking the men, and now apparently this man of God is infatuated with her, and somehow that makes sense to drive the plot forward to get it here. Like, oh, I guess she needs air, she needs to breathe, or this or that, and walk on land with legs. Like, they're just putting in these weird rules for her as a mermaid to settle in Philip's relationship or support lines like this. But once again, you have them split up even more, with Jack to find his ship with the chalices that Ponce de Leon left, carrying it back to get to the journey of the fountain. One where he has to go in order for Angelica to live in the moment because Blackbeard is an evil man who wants to kill his own daughter, and runs into Barbossa at the same time, where they both discover that the Spanish got here first and have the chalices that they have to steal from them, where they honestly get captured by the Spanish into doing so. At that same point, you get the best scene in the entire film, with Barbossa discovering his background of what he was searching for here, using the crown as a guise for revenge against Blackbeard for removing his leg and shrinking the Black Pearl. And this is the part that actually has the best monologue for someone who is the first villain and now an anti-hero developed with his own moral code, with his explanations that is both passionate and dark, seeking back to who he was. But at the same time, you have to contend with the shallow but somehow built relationship between Philip and Serena that allows allows Blackbeard to get the tear by torturing them. Real convenient on this part to have this whole shit set up for the MacGuffin of a tear to lead to the next part of the film, which has no great involvement into them conducting. The business of this entire film just has to have this poor romance to justify a single tear. That's the only reason it exists, and it's very infuriating. It's not real, and they never treated it as such, yet they do it anyway, and the other side is doing some important work. While on the other hand, Blackbeard is mostly just here wanting everyone to do his own bidding, being sadistic enough to want others to suffer to just get what he deserves. So you could see it's both ends of being poor, a poor villain and a poor couple, and you can't see much going into this because we were just on land in search of one go, and at least the others are more spread out in the Caribbean, but this specific film versus the others takes a more shallow approach, beginning in London and ending up wherever the fountain is, probably in the Caribbean too, and not the real rumored location of Florida like the actual legend was, because there are just too many mountains to say otherwise. Like, I still really want to talk about Jack's moves because they are brilliant and the perfect escape and how he tricks the Spanish, but it's too little to even matter when most of the plot revolves around him going back and forth to them and doing the rest of the film while secretly leading Barbossa and the Brits to get them finally. And Gibbs here is just left to his own devices to probably find the pearl or whatever, which really shows that the values of this film are just all over the place to find a tear and find a chalice, to find this again and join together at the end to tie it all in. Not much time to develop to who they are, unlike the last films that had its stretch, where honestly, showing how they probably shouldn't have adapted this Stranger Tides book anyway. Which then comes the time of revealing where the fountain was and the fight, setting the stage for the prophetic passing of Blackbeard and Barbossa's fight together before he stabs him with the poison, since the Spanish was also behind them. Where at this point, I have to really say that the badassery of the Spanish is also very pointless in this film to begin with, where you had that beginning with King Ferdinand wanting them to set sail, where it is revealed that their core mission was to come in and just destroy this fountain, while waiting behind Barbossa after Barbossa was waiting behind Jack and Blackbeard, going in first and going in again, just so they could say that this is pagan shit and we are Catholics, so let's destroy the fountain and walk away. Like, sure, people do love the energy, but do you really think that this serves any other purpose to the plot other than this? Because, you see, this is the actual problem with the film. It's just these factions doing its own thing. Like, you have Jack searching for the pearl again, and of course Barbossa going after Blackbeard, who also goes after the Fountain of Youth, while the Spanish are also here, who just want to destroy what Ponce de Leon found. It's not coherent, and it never was for the most part, just sending them out there or whatever. It's just a whole mess where you can't actually focus on what's going on, where Philip is also still here, being Philip to still be there, and the boy frees him to go free Serena, I guess, which goes back to deliver the chalices with the tear to Jack for plot reasons, and disappears with Philip afterward to forgive him and love him apparently for some reason. This is also where you see that this is the end of their stupid story, where she drags him down with no explanation of where they go from after that, like they even mattered in the first place. And it's more infuriating by Dead Men Tell No Tales, because they were honestly supposed to be a part of that film in Rossio's original screenplay for Dead Man, but they weren't actually included in the final product, making it more baffling and confusing to why they even exist as characters, why this plot even had to exist, which honestly makes you hate it more than this one because it does not solve the choices made like they never even existed. Again, reminding you that this takes place a year after Stranger Tides. But back to the point of this film, Jack has to use the chalices now since Blackbeard and Angelica were poisoned and is now running out of time. Another scene that I do like because Jack uses his skills to get Angelica the help she needs rather than Blackbeard for his sinful nature, indirectly killing him by tricking him to the right chalice that he had the tear and the other one that didn't, but then feints the mistake that allows Blackbeard's life to be taken by the waters, while Angelica gets to inherit the lives of her father as a way to say that she can be forgiven for his past life and whatever a true father would do for his daughter, despite his own cruel actions. Which, of course, the problem with this moment is how shallow Angelica's mind and character is over trusting her father, despite her objecting to his cruel actions during the course of the events of the film, like Serena and the other attempts on her life that could have been taken away. For her, she is just this stupid to believe that he deserves a chance at life other than her own, and it kind of makes me feel that this is disrespectful for her as a character, despite what has Jack done to help her see that he is a bad man. Enough where she is still bitter and the only thing left is to maroon her on an island with one pistol and one shot. Now, of course, this is also not the end of her story, since the end credits have her appear with the washed up Jack Sparrow voodoo doll that gives her a clue that she has something left up her sleeve for later installments, but it ends up being nothing for her character afterward. Now the reason I say that line is because, like the mermaid, she does not appear as a character in the very next film, despite Penelope Cruz stating she was originally interested in reprising her role, where instead they just got her husband Javier Bardem as that villain. Again, if you look at that film, and in the case of this one of how Jack ends up, you can have that theory that Jack is an idiot of who he is in that film because of Angelica probably messing up his actions by voodoo, but that doesn't really explain the nature of the voodoo doll with her so far away and her own absence. You can't really chalk that up decision because he's successfully the captain of the Pearl at the end of that film, and there's nothing to suggest otherwise that helps her case and leaves her on an unsolved note, just being stuck on an island with a doll that may or may not have contributed to the events of why Jack was the way he is. Where the other problems of this film is introducing things that don't matter the entire series, like this being a sideshow adventure or spin-off that doesn't involve anything remotely interesting. But the saving grace of it all happens to be the entire ending of the film, with Gibbs and Jack joining together for their love of the pirate's life and new adventure and hope of where he learned and grew from his adventure to be immortal by name and not by magical curses or blessings. That's how it ends, where it continues the adventure onto great heights with the Black Pearl, until again you watch the next film and it betrays where it goes. So when you look back in the entire adventure of Stranger Tides, you look at something half-baked, full of ideas wedged together that does not fit for a story. Ideas of a story, yes, but characters with no clear way to the necessity of their existence. It's not a bad thing that they wanted to make this, but it still was a bad thing with how they went about it. They never solved any pressing issue, nor explored the deeper parts of where these people wanted to go in their life to fit the legend, and also filled with fluff that should have never existed and had nothing to do with the adventure. Luckily for them, this Pirates was a beloved brand that made so much money that the second film in the franchise to make over $1 billion, yet at the cost of being one of the most expensive films ever made. But this doesn't mean you still cannot enjoy it. Jack Sparrow is still his Jack, and so is Barbossa, and they do make this journey worthwhile despite its lackluster appeal. Where the truth of Pirates is, in order for one to be good, you must inherently focus on the journey of where they are and who they are as characters to actually enjoy what a pirate's life means for them. I'm all done. Goodbye.